Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruver. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Well, welcome to another edition of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your host, Jason Mefford.
And I'm Kathy Gruver, and welcome back. We are so happy to have you here. What are we talking about today, Jason?
Well, today I thought we would talk about masks.
Like comedy and tragedy masks, like kabuki theater, like ancient
Halloween masks, right? Since that wasn't too long ago.
Yeah.
No, not any of those masks actually, even though it's kind of a good maybe analogy for what we're going to talk about. But maybe to start off, let me share with you a story, an experience that I had, and that'll kind of help explain why we're talking about masks. Okay. I was at a retreat, went to a retreat. It was on kind of bringing mindfulness into the workplace and how to actually do that to help reduce stress and some of these other things. So it was different speakers and people who had been doing this in corporate America, how they were working on it, so I could learn how to help my clients bring that into their workplaces as well. And one of the sessions that we had was on masks, and it was a really interesting discussion, because what happened is the speaker handed out these little postcards, and on the postcards, what he wanted you to do is it was broken into two different parts. There's a front and a back on it, and so on the one side we put information about ourselves, like I'm a male, my age, where I live, okay, but just kind of anonymized. On the other side, it was split into two parts, and on the left-hand side, we were supposed to draw a mask of what we try to present to the world. So the face or the mask that we're presenting to the world. And so we drew that mask, and then we were supposed to put, I think it was 3 to 5 words on that as well. Then on the right-hand side of the mask, or of the postcard, we were supposed to draw what we really felt like, right? So the mask that we're showing the world, and on the right-hand side, what we actually felt like, a picture of that, and again, like 3 to 5 words describing it. So he was going through, because he was talking about how, as people, we all wear these masks. We show the world one thing, but inside, we're usually something completely different. And this was actually, it was a presentation I actually got emotional in, was on the verge of tears, or a little bit of tears too, which I know is not cool to admit as a guy, but hey, it happens and you go with it, right? Because it was so powerful to me. And one of the things that was so powerful was what he had us do was get up. And so there's about 200 or 300 of us in this room. And after we'd fill out our postcards, we get up and we start walking around, and what we're doing is passing the cards to other people just randomly. So it's like we're shuffling all these cards in this room of 200 or 300 people. And then we were supposed to go back and sit down at our seat and look at the card that we had. And here's what the amazing thing was, right? Is I looked at the card that was in my hand, and it was almost identical to mine. Some of the same words on both sides, the same facial expressions on both sides. And I flipped the card over, and it was a female in her 50s that lived in Phoenix. And that just kind of hit me, because, what I realized is everybody's out there trying to put on their best face for everybody, but inside we all have some of those same, feelings of inadequacy, of, hey, to the world, I'm making it appear that I have my shit together, but in private, I'm dying, baby. I mean, I don't have my shit together. And it kind of reminded me of another story when I was younger, because, I remember in this youth group that I was in, one of the leaders at one point said, everybody has issues and troubles. And he actually made reference to this really popular girl, again, that you would think, oh, she's beautiful, she's smart, she has everything going on. And he's like, no, she has the same insecurities that everybody else does. So that's why I thought it'd be good for us to talk about masks, because a lot of times, for us to realize that we're still like everybody else, even though we might see them wearing this mask, inside, they're probably just like us and are still dealing with some of the same kind of things.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. That's such a powerful exercise. And it is a really good reminder. And I remember being at, when I studied with, I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh when I was at Harvard, and there was a couple other psychiatrists who were teaching this 3-day module. And they were talking about conversational psychology. And one of them said, how many of you were bullied as a kid? And almost every hand went up. How many of you have imposter syndrome? Almost every hand went up. And you're looking around this audience of like 1,200 people who are some of the tops in their field, still feeling inadequate, still feeling like they weren't good enough, still sometimes that scared little bullied kid of, I don't have anybody to sit with in the lunchroom, and it's we forget that. We do forget that. And a couple of years back, and I'll try to dig up this video, a client of mine, she's a police officer, but she and I have these awesome philosophical conversations about this very thing, about what is really happening inside of us. And we can't assume anybody has it all together or anybody doesn't have it all together. We never know what their story is. We never know what their inner dialogue is. And it was a video of, I think it was maybe just silent but with music. And it just showed people walking through their day, people getting on the subway, people walking down the street, people doing exchanges at the lunchroom, all this stuff. But then it had a bubble of what was actually happening in their life. Just diagnosed with cancer. Just lost a child, husband just walked out, mother died of Alzheimer's, just got, and it put the cat down, and it just showed what all these people were actually going through on the inside, which allows us to be a little more patient, not only with ourselves, but with everybody else. So that person that cuts us off on the freeway, yeah, we can yell and scream and think they're just being a jerk. We don't know what they're off to or what they just left.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that story about the guy sitting on the plane and the kid behind him is kicking a seat. And he finally turns around and says, my God, woman, can you control your kid? And the lady says, I am so sorry. I just buried my husband. And on my way back from the funeral, I'll try to keep my kid in line. Mm-hmm. And it's like, not that we want to excuse away bad behavior, but it is true that we never know what is behind that mask. We never know what is actually happening in people's lives, which can allow us to be a little more patient, again, with ourselves and others. So that's what a great exercise. I think we need to all start doing that. Just walk around and hand people our cards. Hi, I'm dysfunctional. Me too.
Well, and it's interesting because, I was talking to some people at Google, because you mentioned imposter syndrome. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about Google and the employees, these are like the uber brains of, in corporate America. The people that work at Google, a lot of them are very, very technical. They're very smart. They have a very high IQ. And that's what some of them were telling me in studies that they'd done. 2/3 to 3/4 of the people at Google have imposter syndrome. They feel like they're in over their head too. So it's like, if some of the smartest people in the world are feeling that, hey, you know what? If you feel that too, it's okay. You're human. It's okay to be human. It's so offensive, right?
So offensive. No, I know it is, but it's also, and I'm kind of looking at the flip side of this, which is, thank God we put on masks. Because if we walked around actually completely 100% vulnerable, letting our shit show all the time, it would be a shit show. Nobody would ever get anything done. But seriously, like if you walked up to someone in a cafe and said, oh my God, how are you doing? And they actually seriously told you how they were doing, we would never get any work done, because there is that secondary gain and there is that poor me thing. And there is that, so on one hand, it's become socially acceptable to put that mask on. You can take it to an extreme of so putting on another persona. So there seems to be this almost, this gradient nature of these masks of, yes, we want to be socially acceptable and we don't want to just spill our junk in the street and we have to function. And do we take it to the level where we are so fake and so phony and putting on such a persona that it's not actually being truthful anymore? Because I think we all wear different hats at different times. I interact with my parents very different than I interact with my friends, than I interact with other speakers, than I interact with my clients. That, we have those aspects of our personality that we tap into, and we do have different masks for different locations. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we do, right? Because as we all have a feeling or a need to be accepted. And where the hard part comes in is, this is where cognitive dissonance comes in. And so that's where, again, you're trying to hold two contrary beliefs at the same time, and you can't do it. It's hard to do, right? And so the problem is, like you said, sometimes you get people, that you kind of see in these reality TV shows, and some of the celebrities and other people that are out there. They're just so fake, right? That it almost makes my stomach turn. And so, the problem is, if you go to that far extreme of, really acting your whole life,
Yeah.
It totally fucks with your life. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why, you end up, having addictive problems, going through relationships a lot, because you don't have your shit together. Even
Right.
though it appears to everybody else that you do, you absolutely do not. And so
Right.
there's that fine balance between, yes, if we walked around um, negative all the time, and just airing all of our dirty laundry, well, that'd kind of suck, right? So, but there's times when it's okay to be vulnerable and to let people know what's actually going
Yeah.
on, right?
Absolutely.
One of the other, uh, heard another speaker use the term vulnerability is sexy.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
it shows that we're actually human, and it's okay. Um, we don't want to get down on ourselves. We don't want to, bring other people down, but it's okay to kind of acknowledge for a while, you know what, sometimes life sucks.
Yeah.
It's okay, but let's just acknowledge it. Let's feel it as deeply as we can at the time, and then let's move on. Take 5 minutes, take an hour, go take a nap, do something, but you do have to move on, with yourself. But I think it also, realizing that other people are wearing masks and going through this too,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, helps you be more compassionate
Yeah.
to
Well,
other
and
people.
there's an authenticity in letting that emotion show. And I
Mhm.
mean, you and I are both speakers. Probably a lot of people who are watching are speakers. And there have been times where I have told a story, because I tell a lot of stories during my talks, where I have literally started to tear up. And I was just at the UK hypnosis conference where I was doing a talk on using visualization in hypnosis. And I always tell the story of a client of mine who ended up dying of cancer, and how we would do this visualization of angels swooping in and carrying the tumor away. And she started to feel better, and she started to be improving, and she was having dinner parties. And then she went back to the doctor, who said not only had the tumor not shrunk, it actually grew, and he gave her 2 weeks to live. And I wish he wouldn't have done that, because she was thriving, but over the course of that 2 weeks where she was dying, she kind of took me aside, and she said the only time she felt relief, the only time she didn't have pain, was when she was doing those visualizations, and it gave her strength, it gave her choice, it gave her this feeling of power. And though we didn't find the cure, we found healing. Now, I tell that story a lot, a little more emotionally than I tell it to you, because I'm just sort of reviewing it. But I have never done this before. I put her picture up on the screen, and I went, so I want to tell you about a client of mine. And I looked back at the picture and just burst into tears. I didn't even get into the story before I'm standing in front of this audience, tears streaming down my face. And you see me cry. I get blotchy. It's not pretty.
Oh, come on, still
It's not an
pretty.
okay look. But it's just so fun, because I just kind of lost it. And then I looked out in the audience, and you could see all these people kind of going, and I mean, I would never use that as a device of, hey, look how human I am, and accept, and relatable. But sometimes something just moves us. And I don't want to sob through every presentation I give, but I've realized if I start to tell a story and I get a little emotional about it, it shows them that I actually care about that I'm passionate about what I'm doing. And it sometimes people look at us on stage as this other thing, this like bigger than life. I'm not like that. They're better than me. They're more sick, whatever they think of that. And this, I think, brings us back to a more human level. At least I feel like that. It makes us more acceptable and more relatable as a speaker, as a professional. And again, I don't want to burst into tears during every talk because I've told that story dozens of times, and occasionally I tear up, and I usually don't. For some reason that day it hit me, and I just let that happen. And the woman in the front row stands up and goes, "I'm a crier too," and hands me a Kleenex. And I'm like, oh, God.
Love it.
On one hand, I was like devastated. On the other hand, I'm like, this is the sweetest thing ever, because it brought this entire, and it was the last story I told, brought this entire group together in this sort of kumbaya moment of let's let those masks down. Let's talk about our vulnerabilities. And if someone dies who you love, we can grieve for that. It's okay to have that emotional response to that. So it was, I could have suppressed that and stood there and powered through and been all stoic, but I'm like, it's coming out. Here we go. Blah.
Well, I think it's
okay to let the mask go.
Well, yeah, we've got to let it drop. I mean, it's interesting because you were saying that, and I think it was this last week or the week before, there was in our little face group for the National Speakers Association, there was somebody that brought up that point. They're like, is it okay to get emotional on stage? And I was kind of pissed that so many people were like, oh no, that's unprofessional. And so I had to respond back, and I'm like, are you kidding me? If you feel an emotion, you go with it.
Yeah.
Because the thing is we are human, and it's that authenticity, right? If you don't cry or grieve when somebody that you love dies, there's something wrong, right?
You will eventually.
Yeah, you will eventually, and it's
It'll
okay.
come out one way or the other.
People understand that. People expect that. It's okay to remove the mask or to be more who you are, right? And I guess because that's kind of another side of it, is that sometimes people wear masks because they're trying to hide their hurt. They're trying to hide their insecurities or other things like that. Sometimes people are wearing masks just to try to fit in and be like someone else. And I think, there's those are two kind of different things. And again, that's where that cognitive dissonance comes in. If you're always trying to kind of be a chameleon and fit in with other people, you're never going to have those deep relationships with people. You have to be you. You have to be authentic. Some people aren't going to like you, but the people that do like you are going to love you, and your life will be so much more fulfilled. I mean, I'm a freak. I'm a weirdo in a lot of ways.
I know.
And you know what?
This is why we're doing this.
You got to bring the freak show in here.
Well, you counter my normalcy because I'm so normal.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Right. No. And that's why we started doing this, because we had this sort of like weird, crazy person rapport, this bantery brother sister like thing, and that's, I think, what brought us together to do this. If we were we have to be similar enough that we can play off each other to actually make this work. But what to go back to what you were saying about putting on all these masks and trying to be somebody else, and what is the quote, just be yourself, everybody else is already taken.
Oscar Wilde, one of my favorite quotes. Yep.
I've always found funny. But it's like, I think, and this goes back to what we've mentioned so many times, is the self-awareness of, well, who am I? You go to work and you're the receptionist, and then you go to your gym and you're the lady who does aerobics, and then you go home and you're the mom, and you go home. Well, who are you? And we use these external labels to define ourselves. We use these thought forms and these relational things to say who we are. We don't actually know who we are under all of that. This is why I see so many, typically moms who, their role is mom. They are mom. Maybe they're a little helicopter-y, parenty kind of. They do everything for their kid. And then suddenly their kid leaves the house and they wake up one morning and go, who the fuck am I? Because they're not mom anymore. And there's this struggle with identity of, well, what am I once that label, hi, my name is, well, what happens when you're not that thing anymore? And I found that when I left Hollywood, because it was, I'm an actor. I mean, I was so identified with that thing. And when I moved up to Santa Barbara and I was no longer an actor, I would find when people would say, what do you do? I'm like, I used to be an actor.
Used to be?
And there was one day, well, thanks, but there was one day where I said that to someone and I went, why am I still hanging on to that? Like, why am I still so associated with that's who I was, and I didn't want to let that identity go. And I found that really fascinating. So I think that's one of our challenges as humans navigating this planet is when we drop those labels, which are those masks, who are we underneath that? And that becomes a very broad philosophical question. We'll bring Eckhart Tolle on, we can talk about that. But who are we? Who am I under these labels? And I think that's something that we really have to sit with ourselves and figure out. That's a challenging question.
Well, yeah, because it's interesting that you said that, about being an actor, because I've experienced, in different ways, similar things like that through my life too. And it is amazing how much of our own identity we put on whatever that thing happens to be. It's like checking the box. And, I remember one of the guys that I used to work with, because he told his son, because they were a mixed race marriage, and people were trying to put them into boxes. It's almost like you have to fill out that form, right? What are you? And they've got race on there. And one of the things that he taught his kid is don't let people put you in boxes. Yeah. Because that's not who you are. And so I think it's interesting, like you said, if we think, well, I'm an actor, that's who I am, or I'm an athlete, that's who I am. Right. Because the reality is, and I mean, I'm friends with different athletes and Olympic athletes. Well, when they're an athlete and an Olympic athlete at the top of their game, and that's who they are. Yeah. But the problem is at some point, you get old really quick in professional sports. You've got to retire in your 30s a lot of times. And so again, if your whole identity is wrapped up into some label or some mask that you're wearing, when that goes away, it's like your whole world just gets dropped out from underneath you, and so you've got to be thinking, well, athlete is maybe a label, or it's something that I do, but it's not who I am, right? Because I will continue to be a person even after whatever that thing goes away. And so, like you said, the helicopter mom, it's the same thing, sometimes when people retire. They work their whole life, and then all of a sudden that's no longer what's there. And sometimes they end up kind of giving up the will to live almost. I saw personal family experience was, I kind of saw that with one of my grandmothers. Was, she was the mother, the grandmother, the caretaker, because my grandfather had Parkinson's disease for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And so she was the constant caregiver and was always doing and always going. And when it got to the point where my grandfather had to go into a facility because, she couldn't physically move him and do some of the stuff that needed to happen anymore, literally within 6 months, she was dead. Yeah. And so she'd tied up so much in her, being that caregiver, that when she was no longer the caregiver, she really just kind of gave up the will to live. Right. And, again, she was at the end of her life, but it's just a story to show that, don't place so much on that mask or that label that you have. Find out who you are, be who you are. Yes, you might be a receptionist. You might be a truck driver. You might be an accountant, I used to be one of those.
Sorry. Very
yeah, I know. Sorry to hear that, right? Yeah. Woo!
That's great. Really, I can't do math, so you can do the accounting, and I'll just. I know to give my agent 10%. That's all. That's all right.
With accounting, you can make the numbers be what you want them to be anyway.
Oh, perfect. That's great to know.
Yeah.
No, there's something that happens so much in the United States when we're at a party or we're at a mixer or we're at some event. What's the first question we ask? What do you do? Mm-hmm. And it got to the point where I was in my rebel stage a couple of years back, and it's, so what do you do? And I'd say, when? What do I do when? What do I do at work? What do I do in my spare time? What do I do on Tuesday nights? What do I do when? And you could see these people getting annoyed because it was sort of a shitty response because I was just sort of being troublemaker.
You're trying to mess with them is what you're doing.
Trouble. Yeah. Well, but it opened up a whole different conversation. What do I do when? On Tuesday nights I do hip hop. On weekends I do flying trapeze. And it's interesting because I was at a women's retreat here in Santa Barbara, and we were going around the circle and saying who we were and what we did. And I went through my thing, and a couple women down the thing said, so I identify as a bisexual travel writer, da 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 da. And I was just like, okay. Nothing in what she said threw me, except she said, I identify as a, and I thought, huh. And I really started to think about those aspects of my life. I identify as a dancer, been dancing since I was 3. I identify as a massage therapist. I identify as a speaker. I identify as a trapeze artist. I identify as but it was just an interesting thing of, is that just that thing I do, or do I identify with it? Does my identity get wrapped in it? But the way she phrased it, it didn't sound as if it wrapped it in. It sounded as if she could just put that on and take that off, which I thought was a really interesting way to phrase it. Because I'd never heard, other than gender stuff, I've never heard anybody say, I identify as a travel writer, something. It was kind of interesting the way she put it together.
Well, and that is really interesting because again, and words are important. And so when you say I am, and then you put some label onto it, right? We probably do kind of wrap that identity around it. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of interesting because before you were talking and saying that, I would say, same thing like you, I do lots of different things, right? I mean, I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a musician, I'm a poet, I'm a husband, father, I mean, it's like all these different things that we are as an identity. But is that who Jason is? No. Right? Jason is a musician. I like to play music.
Sure.
But if I could no longer play music, but I cease to be Jason, no. Right. And so, again, I think that's one of the things that hopefully, people are understanding is your self-identity is not wrapped up into the masks or the labels or the other things that you might do or how people might describe you.
Yeah. So, I mean, with all the fires happening in California, I have a friend who's in Paradise where the entire town is gone. And they not only lost their house, they lost their 4 rental houses. So
their whole livelihood gone.
Literally have nothing. And what was so fascinating about this is what she's been posting on Facebook is about perseverance and, hey, everybody who's in this same situation, don't think you can walk right back in your house. Don't think you're going to walk into the store. You're going to have to rebuild this. And her messaging is so authentic and so strong and filled with grace. And I don't think it's a mask that she's putting on. I think she's just authentically like, hey, I had nothing before. I'll build it back up. But to look at someone like that who can let that mask drop and just be authentically strong for the people in her community who also lost everything, that's so impressive to me. So if you could face that where you literally have nothing left and be that strong and that authentic and honest in your approach to people, then we can all do that.
Yeah, well, and it's, again, that word authentic is so important to me. Because like you said, and so maybe this is a way again of trying to look at this and think, well, is what I'm doing a good thing or not a good thing? Is, who are you, right? To think about that, what is it that you stand for? Who are you? How do you want to make this world a better place? How do you want to leave your impression here? And, embrace your quirkiness and your weirdness, because that's what makes the world an exciting place, honestly. I mean, I have met some of the most interesting people in my travels all over the world. And I love just hanging out on the street and talking to random people and finding out stuff, because to me, it's just fascinating. Humans are fascinating people. But, as you're thinking about that, embrace that quirkiness, the weirdness that you have, and just be true to who you are. Right now, if we can all improve, right? But again, if there's that authenticity, and like you said, your friend kind of expressing this to people and saying, look, it's okay, right? We started with nothing. We all came into this world as a naked baby. Mm-hmm. Well, everything after that is more than we added, and I can't remember where I heard this story, but, of like an immigrant father, that comes in, and the son's saying, oh, you haven't really accomplished anything, you're still poor and whatever else. And the dad says, well, when I came to this country, I had 10 cents or $1 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. That's all I came to this country with. And I have a home, I have a job, I've raised 4 children, and I have $2 in my pocket now, right? Kind of a thing. So, that man's identity wasn't tied up in the amount of money that he made, right? But in his gratitude for what he actually was able to accomplish. Because again, over that time period, the man generated lots of income to be able to do all those things and take care of his family. And so, while some people might look at him and say, well, you're not a success, I would say bullshit. That man's a total success, total success. And just be true to who you are, be authentic. And if you feel like you're wearing a mask that you shouldn't be wearing, then take it off. Yeah. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Because especially, and so this is one thing is from a guy perspective, right? It was a guy who was giving that speech that said vulnerability is sexy, right? And I'm kind of thinking, sexy, right? Ha ha ha, kind of thing. And then I was talking with some women, and I said, yeah, I just heard this speaker say this, and they look at me and they're like, oh yeah, vulnerability is totally sexy. And I'm like, what? It's a guy. Right. We think, we have to be the He-Man, but actually vulnerability is more sexy to women anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because you're authentic and that's what we need to be. Take off the mask. Exactly. And my final thought on that, and we'll let everyone go off and look at their masks and take those off and figure out what they look like, is just that, that exact same thing. It's figure out who you are. And there's an exercise, whether you do the mask exercise that we talked about at the beginning, which I think is just, even by yourself, that's a really good thing of, what am I showing the world? Go back and look through your Facebook posts and see what you're actually portraying to everybody. And is that who you are underneath all that? And the other thing is write down those who you are. I'm a mother, I'm a sister, what is all that? And what does that bring to you? What does that add to your life? And if you strip away those labels, who are you underneath? We're just this, this positive energy entity human who's walking around, hopefully loving yourself and loving other people. And if you drop away those labels and those masks, that's still who we are. So everybody go forth and examine, ask that question of who am I and who you want to be to those people around you and to yourself. And so, I think that's a good message for the day. Good place to end. It just, the song from the Who are you? Who was just jumping in my head. So I thought I'd share that with everybody else. So now you have a song that will be stuck in your head the rest of the day. An earworm. And for those of you who are into musical theater, I was singing chorus line, who am I anyway? Am I my resume? All right. Or we could do another one. Or Les Mis. Who am I? Jean Valjean. I am not Jean Valjean. I'm Kathy Gruver, and I can be reached at kathygruver.com. And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. And thanks for listening on, and we look forward to having you on a future episode. Go out there and unlock your potential. See you next time. Bye.